Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this latest podcast here at AmLaw Group, where we love talking about all things related to business immigration to the U.S. And here, as oftentimes, to join us and help us dive into some of these issues is my colleague, Alex Verbitsky. Alex, how are you doing?
Good, sir. How are you?
Good, good. So today, the topic I think is a really interesting one, and I'm sure you're going to be able to help us kind of dive into this. But the topic I think is a really catchy idea or a notion. It's what are the stupid, in quotation marks, what are the stupid E2 questions that high net worth investors think about, but they're afraid to ask? And you think there wouldn't be any questions that people would be shy to ask, but there are, and I think probably when your discussions working with us on the business development side, you've probably had a lot of experience talking to high net worth individuals about these issues.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, I experience these questions all the time, and some people, definitely state, hey, this might be a stupid question, but I'm going to ask it anyways. And some people don't even give me
They
that
didn't really
heads
have a
up.
chance to answer it here. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. What I've done is, over the last 12 months, I've had so many questions, such a variety of questions, and I thought, hey, listen, why don't we compile all these questions and give it to the people, let them hear all these questions that are asked, stupid or not,
Right.
and let's get some dialogue going on that.
Yeah, absolutely. And you don't necessarily have to be, a high net worth investor, just any investor who's looking at E2. And I suppose one thing that comes up a lot of times for you is people ask questions kind of like, is this a scam? Are you trying to pull one over on me? Am I going to get deported by ICE later because, somebody sold me, some fake visa scheme that turns out to be illegal? I mean, I suppose you hear stuff like that.
Yeah, exactly. So like one of the common questions is, is this an actual serious strategy or just a loophole, right? I mean, like what essentially like what goes on the background? They're asking, is it just simple paperwork, or is there something serious behind the scenes that us as an attorney office are doing on the back end? So I mean, what are let's say people or how's AmLaw Group assisting wealthy individuals relocating their businesses to the U.S.?
Yeah. No, I mean, it's totally legitimate. I'd actually say it's, uh, would this be fair or not? It's maybe even more legitimate in some sense of the word because the E-2 visa, the whole structure is based on bilateral treaties with individual countries. So it's not a matter of just purely US legislation. They passed a law on, EB-5, for example, right? That's purely governed by the internal statutes of the US. The E-2 structure, E-2 visas, it's a result completely of individual bilateral agreements between the US and other countries, whether it's Canada, UK, Netherlands, So this is, bilateral involving a foreign country, diplomatic ties and stuff like that. So in some sense, it's actually, I'd probably say more serious, right? So it's not just purely internal legislation of the US, but it's something that goes beyond that. Moreover, the E2 treaties, here's a little piece of trivia probably you and maybe a lot of our viewers don't know. The E2 treaties precede any real kind of immigration legislation in the US because I think the oldest one exists with the UK, I'm guessing, and that thing goes back to like the early 19th century. So believe me, there were no immigration laws on the books in the US back in, the 1800s. But they had these treaties already back then. So these things go back not decades, but more than a century or maybe even several centuries. So it's
Yes.
been around a while.
So the E2, yeah, exactly. So the E2 visa has been around a while. It's not like this new thing that people are discovering and
Right.
saying, "Oh, did you know?" Like we've been doing it for a very, very long time at AmLaw Group, and the E2 visa has been, or like let's say the treaty has been around for a very long time as well.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I'll be honest, I've been doing immigration law, more than 15 years. I've been an attorney more than 25 years. I didn't know anything about the E2 before I started doing immigration law, even though I'm an attorney. I knew a lot about other green card programs. So yeah, it's kind of been under the radar for many years. And so I suppose that's maybe why sometimes it surprises clients that you talk to because they're like, wait, if this is so good, why haven't I heard about it? And There might be
Yeah.
variables why they haven't heard about it. Um, but anyway, so do here's something too, I suppose you have to discuss with clients a lot. Is this more for, do you have to be really ultra wealthy to do this, kind of like the EB5, where you have to invest 800,000? Or is this, suitable for other people as well?
Yeah, it's suitable for everyone that wants to own and operate a business in the U.S. Essentially, the way that I like to put it is, it's available for people that want to come take advantage of the U.S. market, and when they're done taking advantage of that market, they go and exit the U.S. Right. So it's available for, let's say, smaller businesses that meet that minimum investment requirement of $100,000.
Mhm.
Or if, let's say, you're a more established business and you want to, let's say, force inject more capital, I mean, you could invest 500,000 into that business, right? So it's available to all net worths, all
Yeah,
let's
yeah,
say
all
level
levels of,
classes.
income levels. I mean, as long as and
Yeah,
we'll probably talk about this a little bit later, but as long as you've got, at least 100,000 you can put into the US business, you should be good to go. And so 100,000 is not what it was 20 years ago. And so generally people have access to that liquidity, whether they might have it already readily available, or they might get a, second mortgage on their home, which is very common with our Canadian investors a lot of times. That real estate has appreciated so much in Canada that, they get a second line of credit or something, a second mortgage on their house, or if they don't even have a mortgage, and that allows them to get the cash out that they need. Or again, if you're, higher up in terms of, the investment, levels that you're looking at, sure, if you invest 200, 300, whatever, that's makes it even all the better.
yeah, right on. Listen, here's another question that I have that commonly is asked. Okay, and it's the comparison between investor visas, which is the E2 and the EB5 visa, right? And let's say someone qualifies for the EB5 visa. Essentially, they want to know, is there something I'm missing out on that maybe I don't have to inject $800,000 into an EB5? I can get away with an E2. So essentially, is there a benefit or a negative with choosing either options?
Well, it's kinda like choosing between, I suppose, a Lexus and, a Chevy or some Chevrolet. I mean, they're both cars, and they're both gonna get you where you wanna go, but it kinda depends on what your needs and your long-term goals are. And what am I talking about? So the EB5, the biggest difference is the EB5 leads to a green card, the E2 does not. I mean, that's probably the biggest difference. But as you well know, Alex, too, that doesn't bother a lot of people, right? There's a lot of people, I think, including in particular, maybe a lot of Canadian investors, they're not necessarily looking to get the green card and not even citizenship, right? But because of the proximity, between the two countries, and they might already have active business operations in the US, yeah, they want to have the opportunity to come down here, maybe work here, develop, branch office or something like that. And so the E2 just makes sense. And so the EB5 for them is not even of interest because it just doesn't meet their needs. Whereas the
Right.
the E2, does not lead to a green card. You could be here 20 years in an E2 status, and you're not one step closer to getting permanent residency. But what does it give you? It gives you flexibility, and flexibility in the sense that, if you're able to limit how many days you're physically here in the US, you could avoid becoming a tax resident from the US perspective, that you could maintain your tax residency in Canada. Now, I guess for Canadians, that's maybe a bad thing. I mean, a lot of our clients coming from more low tax jurisdictions, they don't want to become a tax resident in the US. Maybe for Canadians, that might not be the case. But again, it gives you that flexibility. So if you don't exceed a certain number of days in the US as an E2 holder, um, then you won't become a tax resident here. But you could still come in and out of the US as much as you please. And here's another thing how maybe the E2 might be more appealing than the EB5 is just in terms of the amount of time you spend here. If you do get, let's say, an EB5 and you eventually get a green card, you're supposed to spend at least 182 days here a year or more. Otherwise, that might raise red flags. It could lead to you losing your green card, even if they suspect you've given up on your residency. Whereas with the E2, you could spend as little or as much time as you need here. So you could live here every day, 365 a year, or you might even just spend 90 days a year here, and maybe your family's spending more time here, or maybe your kids are going to school. But you have that flexibility with the E2. So I think that helps.
Yeah, well, you know what? I actually have a really good question, and it's revolving around the idea that, as I know, and as we know, that with an E2 visa, it limits your ability to be involved in just the company that you invested in. Okay, so let's say you opened, let's say that landscaping company in Florida.
No.
Okay, and you're allowed to work on this company. Okay, but if you're spending 180 days of the year in the States and then the other 180 days in Canada, like, doesn't that pose some sort of red flags as well? Like, do you have two businesses that you're running at the same time and, it's seasonal? You come to Florida, run that business, and then go back and run your Canadian business. Wouldn't there be some sort of negatives in that?
Negatives for the investor, in the eyes of USCIS, the US Immigration Service?
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Like, essentially, as well as I know the E2 visa,
Yeah.
I mean, it grants you the ability to live and work in the United States on that business,
Mhm,
right? To,
mhm.
to work on that you've opened, right?
Right.
Um, but if you're not spending most of your time on that business, which is, let's say, you're only in the states for 90 days a year, I mean, are you allowed to operate a business in Canada while you're an E2 visa holder?
Yeah, sure, sure. Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, there's
Oh,
really
okay.
there's no limitation on that. Um, yeah, so yeah. Yeah, I think that's makes it even more flexible and doable. And like I said, there's
Okay.
no so here's the thing, what they look at from, an E2 perspective, like, in your scenario, if the client's only spending 90 days a year here, somebody could say, "Hey, are you really managing this business? You're only here 90 days." But I've never in, almost 20 years of doing this, have never heard an immigration officer, a customs officer ask a question of, "Well, you're only here 90 days. Obviously, you're not managing the business because you're here so little." I mean, that's because there's no as long as you can show that the business is doing well, that just means you're a good manager, right? No one's gonna look at how many days you're spending here. Now that again, with a green card, it's different, you've gotta spend the days here. Um, but, as long as you're regularly coming here. Now, this is hypothetical, I've never run into this. You know, Canadians, for example, they get the E-2 for 5 years at a crack. Let's say, a year goes by and you don't even come to the US, and then you enter after over a year. I mean, I guess it's theoretically possible the officers might ask some questions about the business to, uh, ascertain that it's really still operating, because if your business isn't operating, you lose the E-2. At least you lose the right to keep the E-2. Now, the government's not always tracking people to see, "Hey, is your business really operating right now?" But I suppose if you were gone for over a year and then all of a sudden you showed up, they could ask some questions and say, "Hey, is this business really, in operation and continuing?"
Yeah, really interesting. I definitely learned something new today. So I guess that we do have
There
some
you
stupid
go, there you
questions.
go. Yeah, yeah, so these
But here's I was always under the assumption that you couldn't be involved in any other business in a foreign country or within the United States, right? So, it just poses the question that during the time of, let's say, not re-entering the US every time you go visit family in Canada or check on your other business, let's say at the time of renewal, I think that was
Mhm,
my main viewpoint to the E2 visa is that at the time of renewal, they're like, whoa, 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 1 second, you've been operating this business for 5 years,
mhm,
but you've only spent,
mhm,
15% of your time in the US.
mhm.
How's that possible? Right. So all you have to do is just prove that your business is active.
Yeah.
Uh, and yes, you do have other businesses in Canada, and you split the time between the
Yeah,
countries.
yeah, yeah. So to get back to
Okay.
your point about you're not able to work for other companies. So you're right. If you're the E2 investor in the US, you can only work for your US company. Your spouse can work wherever he or she would like. But again, if you're managing your Canadian business as well at the same time and you're doing that while you're in the US, for example, that's okay because the thinking is you're not taking jobs from Americans by working on your Canadian business, right? So that's where the thinking is.
Wow.
But if you go work for another U.S. company, yes, that's a no-no. You can't do that. So
Perfect.
yeah,
Right on. I think that definitely opens the doors now to a lot more people in the conversations that I'm going to have with them,
yeah,
because a lot of people are operating pretty large businesses in Canada, and just to shut it down, I mean, it's just a waste,
Right.
right?
Yep.
If they're good managers and they're operating, pretty large companies, and they want to come down under the E-2 visa and do the same, I mean, now they could do it,
Yep.
right?
Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah,
So
now they
hopefully,
know.
yeah,
Perfect.
good stuff. Um,
So,
Go ahead.
yeah, so sorry, did you want to say something?
No, no.
Okay, right on. Okay, so I think the other question that I have or that I see often is, let's say, the denial scenarios. Everyone has questions about success rates. Okay, with the law firm, and as like a general consensus on, what are the denial scenarios for the E2 applications. Okay, and we know that at the minimum level, it's 100,000
Mhm,
investment into the business. Okay, now let's talk to the people that are investing, let's say 3 to 500,000.
mhm.
What are their chances of denial, or what are the reasons of those denials? Right? I mean, they are investing a lot more, or a substantial amount
Mhm.
more than the minimum requirement. So, what are those scenarios looking like?
Well, so here's just to reiterate for people that might not know. When you're doing the E2, you're investing that money. So let's take the scenario of 3 or 400,000 more than the minimum. But investing means more than just parking the money in the bank account of your US LLC, right? You've actually got to spend a good portion, probably about 50% of it prior to you filing for the visa. And you've got to show that the business is ready to get going. I mean, ideally, the business would already be operating before you file for the visa. It doesn't have to be, but it just makes your case a little bit stronger. But if it's not operating by the time you file, you've got to show you've bought the equipment, you fit out the office, you don't have to necessarily hire employees before filing, but you got to have everything right, you have all the licenses, so that as soon as you get the visa, you can come to the States, flip the light switch, and you're ready to go. So there is a degree of risk no matter what, when you're doing this, because you're investing in, you're signing a lease for at least 12 months, you're buying equipment, you're paying for, fit outs or furnishings and stuff like that. So there is a degree of risk. So we always have to keep that in mind. When we're dealing with people from, Canada, Western Europe, that risk level is really low. Um, Nobody's asked us for statistics, but we've never had a denial for a Canadian investor. We really haven't had a denial for a UK investor. We had one UK investor who had a denial, but he wasn't born in the UK. He was from, originally from a somewhat problematic country, and that kind of created some problems. So besides him, we've never had any UK denials. And if I look at Western Europe, maybe we've had one or two denials over like 10 years or so. So statistically speaking, the likelihood of getting approval, at least with us, is very, very high. Now, but what is the downside if you do get a denial? Um, what's the downside? You've got all this money invested, you rented an office or some warehouse space and all that, and then you're not able to maybe fully use it. Hopefully, ideally, you could continue to run the business remotely, like you might be able to get the people ready on the ground, and then they can continue the business even though you're not able to enter the US. And here's the other thing too, you could still continue to enter the US maybe on a tourist status to periodically check up on operations, stuff like that. Um, so
But the risk for denial doesn't change between $100,000 investment to a $300,000 investment.
Well, I would say, yeah, good question. Uh, in theory, the likelihood of denial would probably go down. I agree. If you're investing 300K, because again, that just shows a greater level of commitment, a greater investment level that should add some substance and weight to your case. But let's be honest, like, I mean, if you've got a really poor business model and you're kind of, I don't want to say stupid enough, but you put 300,000 into a maybe not too good of investment, if it's a bad business model for an E2 perspective, yeah, you might get a denial. The chances are less, of course. I mean, and put it like this, if you have any good lawyer who's guiding you, that lawyer should tell you, "Hey, I know you're putting a lot of money into this, but from an E2 perspective, it's maybe not the best." But to answer your question,
Like, you're not investing it in the right avenues, or
well,
you're
right, or
not
for
putting it.
whatever. I mean, there are, picky things that you have to kinda check the boxes on E2s. I mean, it's hard for me to think of a
Mhm.
scenario right now, but it is difficult, right? If you're putting 300 into a business that you could put just 100 in and it'd qualify for an E2, but you've decided to kinda supersize it, you're gonna do 300 off the bat. Yeah, I would say that reduces, the chances of a denial, uh, if you just
Okay.
100K. Uh,
So I think it's a follow-up question on that is that the ratio idea, and I know we've discussed it in the
mhm.
past, but now that we have numbers to compare side to side, I mean, the $100,000 we recommend the $60,000 spend and $40,000 earmarked. Okay, on a $300,000 level, does that have to be proportionate? Like, does it have to be a $200,000 spend and $100,000 earmarked?
So technically, the higher the total investment amount, the lower the ratio goes. Okay. So how much lower? That's something up for debate because the government's not really clear on it. So when we always talk about the 100,000 K, because we say generally, look, 100K is about the minimum. We know, and from experience, we know, you got to put in 50, 60. So that's roughly 50, 60%. I'm sorry, you have to spend roughly 50, 60% prior to filing. If you're putting in 300 K, I mean, that 50, 60% would be, maybe high hundreds, 175. But generally, the more you commit, the less you have to spend prior to the filing. So if you were to put in, say, 500,000 into your business, no, I don't think you'd have to spend 250 prior to filing. You could probably get away with under 200, something like that. Um,
Oh, okay.
it's a black magic. It's a black art a little bit. I mean, there's just no clear numbers out there. There used to be what's called the FAM, the Foreign Affairs Manual, and that's kind of like the manual they give the consular officers, and that's public information. They share that with the public, any updates. So it's helpful for us as attorneys because we know what the materials are that the officers are going through or using to train, others and to evaluate cases. And they used to have a table in there, but I think they took it out a couple years ago. But they used to have a table and said, okay, if you're investing 100K, you need to spend about 50, 60%. If you're, investing a million, then you got to do, maybe spend only maybe 200,000, something like that. But I think they took that out. So, but anyway, the short answer is you don't have to spend as much prior to the application.
So one more follow-up, okay? In your experience in the past 20 years, okay, have you ever seen someone where they let's say started that minimum let's say the minimum investment,
Mhm,
but then they invested more after they got it approved, where they met the minimum requirement, they
mhm,
did $100,000 investment,
mhm,
and then shortly thereafter, they probably invested $500,000
mhm,
more,
mhm.
right? Has there been a scenario like that? Have you
Sure.
ever
I
experienced
mean,
that?
you know what? Here's the
Mm,
interesting thing. Once the clients get their visa, they tend to disappear on us, right? I mean, they don't, they get their visa,
that's tough.
whether they invest another 500K afterwards, we might, just happen to find out. But from experience, we've heard of cases where sure they would do that, and that's probably just makes you're hedging your risks, I guess, in that scenario, right? Because you could put 500K in and spend 300K, and God forbid, I mean, this never happened to us, but you get a denial and you might be out 300,000. Whereas it's a little safer to put in just 100, 150, you spend 50, 60, 75, whatever. It's less risky. And then after that, sure, you can ramp it up and go from there. And here's the good thing too about that approach. First, you're minimizing your risk in case you do get a denial at the outset. The second is they're not gonna trace the funds, for the additional investments that you're doing, right? So that first investment, yeah, we've got to prove where you got all that money from. But if you wanna put in another 200, 300 after that, no one's gonna go back behind you later and say, "Where'd you get that money from?" So, that
Mhm.
way, it's maybe a little bit easier too.
Okay, great. Another question that I get sometimes is like, how involved do I have to be in the business, right? Essentially, people are opening up business. And I think the main question is, can I structure this with management in place, right? Where
Mhm,
I don't, I could director, I could sit back, okay, play golf, but my business is operating.
mhm. Sure. There is no so the regs say you've got to manage and oversee the business, but that's a very that requirement is applied very loosely. So your golf game hopefully will not suffer too much, Alex, if you were an investor, right? Meaning you don't have to do the 9 to 5 grind day after day, going to the office or the store or the restaurant, whatever it is, to work there. You can do that. Many of our clients do, but you can also be kind of a hands-off proprietor. You can hire, a manager, supervisor on site. He or she's there all the time doing all the day-to-day work, and, they just report back to you on strategic stuff. So, that's totally fine, and a lot of people do that.
Right on. Great.
Are you?
I think. I- Hmm. what's another
Should we
question?
talk
I
about, like,
think
what's
oh,
the exit or however go ahead, go ahead.
yeah, I like that question, like the whole exit idea, okay? Because essentially, many a times, people are coming to the U.S. and then they want to live in the U.S. for as long as they can, so live and operate the business as long as they can. But sometimes people come in and say, I want to grow a business here in 3 years and exit the company and just do a sale. Like, what's it look like? What's the option look like? You know, okay, in my, let's say, thought, I mean, we could pursue an EB-5 visa if you exited a company that, produced a significant amount of income to you.
Uh-huh.
Or, you could start another startup, right? And start growing again and file another E-2 visa. Is there, let's say, a limit, or is it viewed negatively when someone files, another E-2 visa 3 years later under a different
Yeah,
business?
yeah, that's actually kind of interesting. Yeah, you have serial entrepreneurs, you could do serial E-2 visas as well. I think we've had 1 or 2 investors that kind of have done that. Um, but yeah, there's no limit to how many E-2s you get and to which companies. So just the main thing to keep in mind is the E-2 is tied to that particular US company, and even I should say tied to that US company in a particular location, because if you get the E-2 and you're based in Dallas, Texas, and then a year later you decide to move to, wherever, Florida, you're gonna have to file an amended E-2 petition because when you make such a large leap now, if you're just moving the office within the confines of a city, you don't really have to do that, but if you're leaving a state or even outside of that metro area and let's say you went to Houston or something, you'd probably have to file an amended case. But, so first thing is, yes, you can do serial E-2, you might close up one business, start another, something like that. One thing that people often ask is, "Well, what happens if, I sell the business?" Yeah, what if once you sell the business, you technically lose that E-2 status. Now, nobody's gonna come to you, so I just wanna make this clear, nobody's gonna come to you on the day you have the closing of your business, you invested 100K, 3 years later, you sold it for $1,000,000. Um, as of that moment, technically, your E-2 status is no longer valid. You still literally have the status, right? You came in, let's say, 2 months ago, you crossed the border, they gave you a stamp for 2 years, you can stay here, your visa is still in the passport, but you're not, technically you're not in, in status anymore. So, anyway, yeah, we're gonna have to take me out of yeah, I know, it's okay, if he waits a few minutes. Okay,
Okay.
sorry, probably gotta restart here. Um,
Sorry about that.
yeah, 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 so I was aware of it. He's okay. Or maybe if you wanna text him and just say Charles is running late, or
Yeah, 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 for sure. I'll do
okay,
it.
so I'll get back to let's see what I was talking about. So one thing to keep in mind again is that your E-2 status is tied to your ownership of the business. Once you sell that business, you're going to lose your status. Now, technically, no one's going to come to your doorstep the day after you sell it and take away your visa. Where this could come up is later subsequently, like you said, Alex. Well, what if I sell this business and then 6 months later I want to launch a new one or I buy a new one and do an E-2? That's where this issue of, when did your business close? When did you sell it? Did you stay in the US? That's when they might catch it, right? Is let's say 6 months later, you decide to file for another E-2. You go to the embassy to get a new one because you're starting a new business. And they're going to say, oh, well, they might say, hey, how did that previous E-2 go? And you might, hey, it was great. I sold it for 3x, revenue, and I sold it in June of 2026. And they'll see though in your records, let's say that you continue to reside in the US till 2027, and they're going to say, well, wait a second here, you should have been doing that.
Mm.
So again, something to keep in mind. No one's going to come to your doorstep, but if you're planning on getting another visa in the future from the US, you're going to have to be careful about that.
Great. Right
Sorry,
on.
I had a cough here. Wait,
So, it seems like, also, like, when you do exit that company, you have to also watch out, that you, let's say, exit the United States and then re-enter on, let's say, a visitor visa if you want to prolong your stay a little bit more, right?
right,
If you
right.
want to remain in, like,
I mean, here's
that's
the thing.
probably the
So here's the thing too. I mean, against with this administration, with the Trump administration, we know they're much stricter on some things than in the past. Theoretically, after you fall out of status, I mean, like after you sell your business, theoretically, you have up to 180 days to still stay in the U.S. before some real serious penalties start to kick in. I don't recommend staying in the U.S. that full 180 days because that just raises questions if you ever go to the consulate again for some other visa. But look, if you sell the business in June, you don't have to leave that day. If you're here, a month, 2, 3 months, I'd say, under 90 days, no one's gonna really care, that much about it. So, it's not like you gotta pack your bags, right after the closing.
Great. Right on. Well,
What
thank you so much
else?
for answering questions. I think oh, sorry.
No, 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 I was gonna say, is there anything else? I was just kinda looking through the questions here.
Yeah, sure. There's a
This
few.
is true.
I
So
mean, we
why
could have
you and not a
expanded.
more so, yeah, what about you and not a more elite firm? Should we address that? I think that's maybe a good one. No?
Um, which one is it? Too small.
It's,
Where is
the
that?
3rd page, 1st paragraph.
Oh, oh, right, right. I mean, I think that's gonna be like a 5-minute response, honestly, right? Like I think that's a good. We can add to this. Maybe dress up in the same clothes and just add
Well, that would be tough to do,
to
match
the
the background.
pod. That'll be
We could
tough.
do
Yeah.
it. You wanna just kinda end on that? I'm okay quick doing that, and I'll jump
Yeah.
over to this other guy.
No.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, so,
Yeah, 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 sure.
uh,
So a lot of times that oh, sorry. So many a times people are asking me, what's so great about AmLaw? Why shouldn't I go with, let's say, a larger firm in the United States? Like, what's so special about AmLaw? Like, I think essentially what they're asking is, do you work with high net worth clients? Are you guys capable of doing that?
yeah. Absolutely. Well, here's my answer to that. I mean, we're a boutique firm, so sometimes people like size, and I can understand, let's say if you have a larger operation and you have businesses in multiple jurisdictions, whether it's, Canada and the US or maybe other jurisdictions as well. I can see in those scenarios where, yes, you might want a large quote unquote elite law firm because, they're kind of handling all your corporate affairs and immigration stuff and all that. That generally is not our client, or our clientele. Our clients are generally looking for a great experience working with their attorneys, a personalized experience, and having the expertise and knowledge to solve all their problems. And I think that's really where we excel because we are small enough such that our clients do get individualized attention. We don't have the layers and layers of. I'm amazed at some of these law firms. There's so many layers of positions and duties besides, an attorney and a paralegal. They've got legal assistants and legal clerks and legal this. And that's a long way of saying you're going to have to get through a lot of layers of bureaucracy before you can actually talk to an attorney. With us, whether it's myself or other associated attorney, we are extremely accessible. And if issues come up, our client wants to discuss it, we can certainly discuss any issues that they have. Our paralegals that are handling the cases have excellent experience and deep experience. And again, they're extremely responsive. And I think that's the most common complaint. If you talk to people about law firms, is they don't get back to the lack of communication, stuff like that. And that's certainly something that we don't have a problem with our clients. So, if you're looking for a customized focus, again, we don't do asylum, we don't do all this, stuff for people running across the border and all that. We focus on our work with uh, high net worth investors, entrepreneurs, and other talented professionals. So, if that's kind of describes your background, then I think we could do an excellent job for you.
Yeah, that's great. And truly, we do have an amazing team, definitely an amazing legal team that can handle these cases through and through, and definitely be personalized. And honestly, it's just a great service to offer people, and obviously get the results that they're looking for.
Right, absolutely. So maybe in closing, we can say again, if, regardless of your, your net worth and your business background and what kind of business you have, if you're looking at a relatively flexible and a relatively fast way of getting to the U.S., getting temporary residency here for you and your family, I would strongly recommend an E-2, considering an E-2, assuming you've got a passport or citizenship that qualifies. Not everybody qualifies for that. And I think, Alex and I would love to have the opportunity to work with you, talk through the scenarios, talk through your plans and goals, and then discuss what solutions we could provide. Thanks again, Alex, for
Perfect.
joining.
Yeah, thanks for having me. This was great. Looking forward to the next one.
Absolutely. And thanks again for everybody. We look forward to seeing you next time.